Hi everyone, so this is a little video overview of your flipped preparatory task for one of our CEP module seminars. This is all looking at how we assess creative performances. So to pull this back to your module guide, your learning outcomes, you'll note that learning outcome 3 for CEP asks you to form, justify and negotiate qualitative judgments in creative assessment. We'll talk about why we want to make judgments about quality regarding creative subjects in just a moment. So hopefully this will be a bit of an overview just generally about educational assessment for some of you who might not be that experienced as assessors, but also setting up the task and letting you know what you have to do. So first off, what do we mean by educational assessment? Well, the highly reputable Wikipedia would describe it as the systematic process of documenting and using empirical data on the knowledge, skills, attitudes and beliefs to refine and improve student learning. So there are some important characteristics here. It's about gathering information from the real world empirical data about the things that we want students to learn. Knowledge, skills, attitudes, beliefs, all of that stuff. So we're assessing the quality, fundamentally, of student skill, attitude, thinking for a specific purpose, hopefully to improve student learning. Now, this is very big and vague, and I deliberately picked something like Wikipedia rather than a particular theory, because theoretical opinion on assessment differs considerably. You just have to look at all of the different definitions of the word assessment. You get all these other verbs like evaluation, estimation, calculation, interpretation, measurement, quantification, comparison, oh gosh. Amongst them you can sort of see a bit of a binary division emerging between, on the one hand, the more scientific, calculation, measurement, these are very sure things, against more interpretive, estimating, more kind of hedging language. That's going to be a theme we come back to. Now, it is going to be useful to distinguish assessment from grading specifically. So, as we know, grading is really the addition of some kind of systematic scale about the qualities that we assess. This is usually described in a letter or a number system, like a 2-1 or a first. Grading is all about providing a framework for easy comparison across different performances. So, for example, to rank students depending on the quality of their output. It's important to note that all grading involves some form of assessment. However, not all assessment needs to be graded, nor should it. We have things like threshold level assessment, which is essentially, have you passed, have you not? Have you done this thing, have you not done this thing? Or indeed, just giving developmental feedback. This is the kind of thing that we're doing formatively all the time as teachers. In order to give someone feedback about where they are and how they should improve, that has to in some way be formed on an assessment judgment. Okay? So assessment is something we do all the time as teachers, and likely you'll have been doing it in many ways and capacities. So to lay out a basic model for how we should assess, really there are kind of four main stages, four main characteristics that we'd see across lots of different forms of assessment, whether they're graded or not. Firstly, when we assess, we need to be able to define what quality actually looks like. What does it mean for something to be good or excellent or okay or not acceptable? Secondly, we need to be able to judge the thing that we're assessing, the performance, accurately and objectively. We need to be able to look for specific examples in the work and really engage with it on a practical way, so that we can, thirdly, work out how that performance relates to our standards about quality. Specifically, often we're looking at how performance falls short of the kind of excellent or ideal performance that we want to see. This is kind of looking at the deficiencies, not so much because the person is deficient, but because there are things that can be improved, and it's the feedback on how they can improve that helps them get better. Okay. Now, fourthly, thinking of feedback, we do need to be able to identify in assessment what the student or the person involved needs to actually do practically, or stop doing, or add or change, or anything like that to improve the performance. Okay, so you can see this is a kind of nice model, looks well and good, should be quite practical, and you've probably been doing similar things in your own assessment. The problem that we run into in assessment is that there is a huge variation in how we can interpret what we see, what students do, notably in terms of quality. You can see I absolutely love this example because you know, this person's obviously thinks it's a 6. This person, for some reason, actually thinks it's a G. So he's completely gone off numbers and he's gone on to the alphabet anyway. Okay, so to kind of emphasise this point, you might have seen this study before. I think it's kind of worth recalling. There was a famous study about the marking of English papers in higher education. I think it's pronounced Diederik PB. So this is in the 70s. They gave 300 English essays to a number of very experienced university lecturers, and each essay was independently marked several times. So you know, kind of huge spread, different institutions, different lecturers, all marking the same things. Now they've actually gave these assessors a grading scale. So this was 1 to 9, 1 outstanding, bad, fail. Okay, you can guess what's going to happen if you haven't seen this already. No one could agree, basically, and a third, i.e. 101 out of the 300 essays, received every single grade. So they received outstanding and a bad fail and everything in between. Okay, horrendous consistency. No one can really claim that that was a valid assessment method, surely. So the question is, what's going on? Well, when we look at you know, this particular study, when they analysed it, really what they found was that while all of the markers used the same kind of families of criteria when marking, they had the same notions of quality, the same areas that they were looking for. The problem was that markers unevenly applied those particular areas of quality. So some people prioritise some things over others, say presentation or ideas or something like this. The main conclusion they drew was that actually having well-formed, explicit and external, i.e. written down, criteria about what good is very important and is in fact more significant than relying on people's kind of individual experiences and expertise in the subject. Great. So in which case, if we have this difference of interpretation, really then what we need is to give criteria, learning outcomes, this kind of thing. So criterion referenced assessment is now the kind of benchmark in higher education. Fantastic. So in this silly little example of the 6 and the 9, you can imagine someone you know, either deciding it needs to be a number, or perhaps, you know, agreeing that they should draw a line under it, or really just going and asking the person that drew that symbol, you know, what they intended. So to get some kind of external perspective rather than just relying on markers' subjectivities. So to get around interpretation, having external reference points goes a long way towards solving problems. However, it doesn't exactly eliminate the need for interpretation, as we will see. Now, one lens to kind of cast light on this is the work of John Dewey, actually, who you might remember from a whole host of other things, notable educational theorist. He's got this publication, Art as Experience, and he makes the distinction between standards and judgments when it comes to making assessments about particular things. This is hugely relevant to the arts and creative subjects because, as he would assert, we can only really make judgments about the worth of artistic material. So Dewey would distinguish these by saying that standards are a kind of objective measure, i.e. it either is the thing or it's not the thing, and we can measure it against some kind of external benchmark. So for example, something like, you know, how we assess whether something is a metre or not. We can go and get a metre stick and a ruler and measure it. Lots of scientific, mathematical knowledge can be assessed in this kind of a way. They are standards. Think of things like mathematical proofs, rules of grammar, Potentially also things like musical pitch, or whether someone is in time or not. You get the gist. You can actually go and measure whether that thing is the case. Now this is compared to a judgment. A judgment is naturally qualitative and subjective, i.e. it depends a lot on the person viewing the thing. So for example, knowledge in the arts and humanities is best assessed often by judgment. We're talking about something's moral or artistic value, to do with feel potentially, looking at aspects of creativity or originality. We can't just go and check those things, relating to some kind of external proof. We have to go through a process of interpretation. Now this is kind of tricksy because usually in learning we kind of involve a mixture of both of these things. Think of a vocal performance. Something like singing off key or on key is kind of both a standard and a judgment, in that there is some degree of kind of factual knowledge there, looking at the hertz of their performance, was it technically in key or not, but there will also be some kind of artistic judgment about how subjectively good or bad that off-key note was. And this could depend a great deal on the context, the genre that is being played, the creative decisions elsewhere in the piece, was it conveying a particular emotion, and potentially also relying on the personal experiences of the person listening to the music. Do they have perfect pitch, for example? Do they have no pitch? Do they enjoy kind of off-key or challenging music? All of these different kinds of things. And so you could see that even with clear-cut criteria or learning outcomes, potentially there is always going to be some degree of qualitative judgment involved in making an assessment about art. Now actually Dewey and one of his subsequent theorists, Elliot Eisner, would go a step further. They would actually say that getting really tight on standards and writing very specific learning outcomes, we can sort of trick ourselves into thinking that there isn't a judgment at play in assessment, and it can lead us to neglecting all of that juicy stuff. So as Eisner would put it, what is most educationally valuable often in the arts is the development of a particular mode of curiosity, inventiveness and insight. He's talking about the kind of educated person, someone really intellectually, creatively educated, and that's only really capable of being described in metaphoric or poetic terms. So you can see that a lot of people are kind of resisting purely quantified criteria-based assessment judgments. So that's been a bit of an overview, an introduction perhaps to educational assessment and some of the issues in assessing creative subjects particularly. What we're going to do in the next seminar is we're going to continue really to play with some of those issues that I've described. So that kind of subjective objective tension, but also now thinking about the tension between an individual assessment decision and a collective decision making process. The way that we're going to do this is by assessing a selection of musical performances. So we're actually just going to get you doing some assessment. The trick of this, or the additional part of this, if we think back to our Learning Outcome 3 for the CEP module, you're going to be forming and justifying qualitative judgments when it comes to creative assessment, but you're also going to be negotiating them. So the key here is that actually what's arising in higher education at the moment in terms of best practice for creative assessment is actually doing assessment in teams. So negotiating assessment with your students, conducting assessment interviews with your students, having panels of assessors marking the same material. So we're going to get you involved in that group process as well. As preparation for next seminar, please could you all individually begin that assessment process. So you're going to watch those music performances ahead of the seminar, please. You're going to have a first stab at breaking those performances down in some way, trying to look across them and thinking, okay, well, if I'm going to judge this, if I'm going to assess it, what components could I assess as being better or worse? So I'm deliberately kind of not giving you clues as to how you might go about this. We're not going to give you full assessment briefs or marking guidance, although we'll certainly give you context around how these performances were produced. But the idea is that you're going to come up with your own areas of quality, the things you think could be better or worse. So I'm for kind of 4 to 5 areas here, and then you're going to take notes for each performance according to those areas of quality that you've identified. So specifically, what makes these performances good or not so good? How could they be improved relating to the things that you think are important? Now, what we're not aiming for kind of full developmental feedback. We're not asking you to grade or rank the performances. We're just asking you to start the process of thinking, how could these be better? Evaluate them, have some ideas around improving them. But really, there's going to be a collective decision-making process once you're in the seminar that will bring all this together. So do bring your notes ready to discuss with your small groups, and once you're in the seminar, you're going to negotiate a shared assessment decision. So you can have a chance to see everyone else's dimensions of quality. You're going to see everyone else's notes about what they think was good, not so good, relating to the performance. We'll probably give you some additional theory and reference points as well to help you make a shared decision. So hopefully that all makes sense. Really, this should be quite a fun task. We're giving you the opportunity to explore a really interesting, difficult practice of negotiating assessment decisions. Ultimately, it's something that we do in the creative subjects, and it's also something you're going to be doing when you do your group assessment of your teaching. So it should be a good practice for that. I will see you in the seminar. Take care.